Welcome back. Previously, I have talked about the history of the European Union and the two sides of the euro as a common currency, but in this video, I will take a look at the possibility of further enlargement and whether it's a good idea to add new members to the community of European nations. Since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, the topic of EU expansion is once again in the news, mainly because, along with membership in NATO, several countries see it as some sort of a guarantee against foreign aggression, although here economic development and an increase in foreign investment and direct financial aid also play key roles. Several countries want to join the EU, but there are also concerns regarding their qualifications, not to mention that certain existing members are opposed to a political union, which seems to be an important goal in Brussels. The predecessor of the EU, the European Coal and Steel Community, was established in 1952 by only 6 states, France, West Germany, Italy, and the Benelux countries, to move their economies closer to each other, while American military might provided the necessary protection on the western half of the continent. 6 years later, the European Economic Community, EEC, was founded, creating a customs union, while 7 other states, Austria, Denmark, Norway, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom, established the European Free Trade Association, EFTA, which focused on free trade instead of gradual European integration. Some of its members, like the UK, later joined the other camp, while others, like Norway and Switzerland, don't want to participate in the EU customs union, although they are part of the Schengen area, so the free movement of their citizens is not an issue. Several changes took place in the 1960s. The existing free organizations, the Coal and Steel Community, the EEC, and the European Atomic Energy Committee became known as the European Communities, EC. Spain then tried to join but was refused, as it was still a military dictatorship, while decolonization and independence removed Algeria's special relationship with the EC. In 1973, the UK, Ireland, and Denmark, along with Gibraltar and Greenland, joined. In 1981, Greece joined. 4 years later, Greenland left, but in 1986, Spain and Portugal were both accepted. In 1987, Morocco and Turkey applied, but they were rejected, so the next round of expansion came after the conclusion of the Cold War. East Germany merged with the rest of the country in 1990. 3 years later, with the Maastricht Treaty, the EC became the European Union, while the Copenhagen criteria stated in the same year that a country must be a democracy with a free market and be willing to adopt all existing EU laws to be considered for membership. In 1995, more former EFTA countries, Austria, Finland, and Sweden, joined the EU, while the population of Norway once again voted against it. While the expansion of NATO was ongoing, several Eastern European countries like Hungary joined in 1999. The USA wanted to avoid angering Russia, so it pressured the EU to start talks with more countries as a temporary guarantee, even though the community already had a hard time digesting its new members. The next round came in 2004 with 10 countries: Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, Malta, and Cyprus joining. It was the largest single enlargement, motivated by economic and political objectives, some of which were slightly sinister in nature. The desire to expand its own sphere of influence and pushing back Russia's, along with the goal of expanding its internal market and help Western businesses expand, resulted in this huge step, which was followed in 2007 by the acceptance of Romania and Bulgaria. The latter 2 countries are still not in the Schengen area, which signals internal division and distrust, although the main reason is economic. Croatia joined in 2013. Further expansion of the Balkan Peninsula is likely, but the UK voted to leave in 2016, which was also a warning sign that not everything was well within the community. Perhaps the greatest issue with expansion is the additional strain it puts on internal politics. The more members the EU has, the more divided the community becomes. Important decisions have to be made unanimously, which is very difficult at the best of times and next to impossible during a crisis. It is also evident that the EU is moving towards fiscal and political integration with a complete banking union and perhaps a common budget, but it is difficult to see when and if national governments would ever agree to the curbing of their own power. The public would have to be convinced first, which can take a few generations, but it's unlikely that ordinary French or German citizens would ever agree to the creation of a unified European government, not to mention the resistance in Eastern Europe. Typically, new aspirants sign an association agreement before applying to prepare to meet the criteria, which can take many years. If the EU's opinion is favorable, negotiations can open in order to convince the community that the country can implement and execute European law. Regular reports are sent by the European Commission to the European Council on the progress achieved. Once the negotiations are complete, an accession treaty is signed, but it has to be ratified by each member state. Only then a specific date is declared, and the entire process can take more than a decade. In 2019, France proposed a new accession plan with 7 stages. The process is being improved, but reforms also take years. Currently, in 2022, several countries are trying to join the community, although in some cases the process has been on hold for decades. As I mentioned before, Turkey originally applied in 1987. It has been in a customs union with the EU since 1995, but negotiations commenced only in 2005, and key political leaders like Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel were against it, emphasizing that Turkey does not respect key principles such as freedom of expression, and it also doesn't recognize one EU state, Cyprus. Negotiations were then frozen after the 2016 coup attempt and subsequent backlash, although a Turkish membership would provide greater EU influence in the region, which is always an important economic and political aspect. Priority is given to the Western Balkans, where several countries are seeking membership. Serbia and Montenegro could join by 2025, but Serbia is traditionally pro-Russia, which complicates the matter. Albania and North Macedonia could follow them later on, although Bulgaria blocked negotiations with the latter country due to disputes regarding minority rights, language, and other topics. Kosovo is not recognized by 5 EU states and Serbia, while Bosnia-Herzegovina is deeply divided, and another conflict is looming in the background between Serbs, Croats, and Muslims. Establishing Greater Albania is also a future possibility. The country could annex Kosovo and also demand territory from Montenegro under the guise of protecting ethnic Albanians there. These issues are not resolved. These Balkan countries all applied many years ago, but in 2022, 3 more states signaled their intention to join, mainly due to the Russian threat. Ukraine was the first to apply, but extreme levels of corruption and the ongoing war makes it practically impossible to join. Not to mention that many major European powers continue to reject such an option, also referring to a low level of economic development. The same goes for Moldova, which fears the Russian presence in the breakaway state of Transnistria, but Georgia is also in a similar situation, as certain regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, are occupied by Russian forces. Accepting these countries into the EU would further divide the community, and it would only serve American, not European interests, although this would not be surprising, since the EU is basically the American periphery, not a rival power to the US. The most likely scenario is that expansion will result in a more divided European community, further weakening the already somewhat impotent EU, which has been unable to solve its internal problems. The Eastern European members are already much less developed than their Western counterparts, The difference between existing and new members would only be greater this time around, which is not a good sign. Significant financial aid to these countries would exacerbate issues with corruption, which would also weaken their institutions. At the end of the day, further enlargement will mainly be a political decision. It would expand the American sphere of influence, pushing back Russia. We don't know how Russia would react to such steps, but these steps will either take many years or they will never happen. Thank you for watching. See you next time.